and welcome to another custom chess position theory video. The custom position I'm going over today is Rao's Lunar Eclipse position. This custom position was initially created in 2018. It's been updated slightly with the kings used to be on h1 and a8, but it's been updated slightly for the kings to be on g1 and b8, but essentially still the same position. And in this video, I'm going to be going over the theories. So let me just go over the quick themes of the position. The first thing we want to notice is that each side, white has a lot of pawns on the king side, I guess, and black has a lot of pawns on the queen side. It's a symmetrical position. And so the name of this game is pawn promotion. So both sides are going to try to push their pawns to promotion as quick as they can, or as methodically as they can. And because there's so many pawns just pointing towards promotion, pawns are very valuable in this position. They're probably worth more than 1 point, so in lots of cases each side will have to sacrifice pieces to reduce the opponent's threat of promoting pawns. So the first thing we want to notice is that there are some weak pawns. So there's a weak pawn on g6, black's pawn is weak, and white's pawn on b3, their corresponding pawn, is extremely weak. Right now they're both defended by one bishop, but if you, for example, play knight h4 or knight f4, you're already attacking the pawn twice. And if black were to defend that, black can defend the pawn, but then white can start pushing their pawns and gang up on this one pawn. So each side's one pawn is not going to stop the opponent from promoting pawns. So that being said, there are actually many opening moves. Normally I go over the less main lines first, but in this video I'm going to be going over the main lines first. And the most common line we see is knight h4. So let's start with knight h4. Knight h4 is an interesting move because it's attacking this g6 pawn right away, and it's freeing up this, and it's going to be followed by pushing the f pawn as well for white. White can also go to f4 and push the h pawn, and I'll go over that move as well. And note that after knight f4, if black were to take on f4, this is normally inaccurate just because white takes back, and now they have a pawn that's one square closer to pushing for promotion. So, and black has spent a move basically helping white push another pawn up the board. So after knight h4, the most common move, though this is the incorrect move, well, it's not too bad. White has around a +1 advantage, but if black plays a natural rook hg8, in the past the main move would have been f4 or bishop e3, and the idea behind bishop e3 would be to sacrifice this bishop for the d2 pawn, and then after it takes back to take with the rook. So after bishop e3, white is just looking to take these two pawns for black, which would make it harder for black to promote pawns. So it's not just about offense, but there's also some defensive themes in this position. And f4 is, of course, just pushing forward to promotion. But after rook hg8, there are moves after f4, but I'm not going to go over them because after rook hg8, the best move in this position is to play bishop takes g6. So it looks like you can't play that move because it's defending this g6 pawn twice, and white is only attacking twice, so white would need one more attacker than black has defenders in order to win the pawn. But actually after rook hg8, we just take with the bishop, and the reason for this is black takes back. So if they take back with the bishop, we take, and then they take with the rook, we play f7. So now if black were to take on e7, we promote, so black is forced to move the other rook back to g8, and after this position, white pushes another pawn forward. So white, it's important over here that white is not just taking a rook, Because if white were to take the rook and black recaptures, then this pawn is hanging, and if white were to take this other rook on g8 to take back, um, for example, white plays f4, then black can just come back and win this other pawn. So even though white is winning a rook for 2 pawns, because both of white's pawns are on the 7th rank, they're extremely valuable, so white doesn't want to take. So instead, g6 can be played. Bishop d6 is played to try to win one of the pawns. Um, White ignores it, plays h4, so black takes the pawn on e7. After h5, I know that any time if black moved one of the rooks, white can just take the other rook, so white is not concerned with taking the rook right away. Bishop f6 is played, f4. And here's kind of where the theory stops. So it's not like clear why bishop takes g6, all those moves ago is winning, but if I were to explain it, it might make a bit more sense. And I guess it's not completely winning, it's around +1. But if we go back to all these moves, we'll see that black is just moving their pieces over and over again. And when black is moving their pieces, um, they're not pushing their own pawns forward towards promotion. So white has just advanced all their pawns. They've moved this pawn up, and they've moved to g6. They've moved the pawn to f7. And if you look at black's pawns have basically not moved since the start of the game. And so white kind of has a head start on the pawn promotion, even though black is up 3 points of material. White is just has a head start on the which uh, pawn promotion, which is extremely important. And actually in this position after f4, black can even try c2. And after c2, black takes, but then, I'm sorry, white takes, but then black's going to take on a1. And after white takes on c2, um, black is now up 6 points of material here. They're up a full rook as well as a piece for a couple of pawns, but black is not even remotely close to promoting their pawns, and white's pawns are extremely strong. So going back, and white in this position, like they can also play bishop d4, um, to knight d6, for example, and sometimes the engine does have to run for a little bit to get a better evaluation on the position because it's so complicated. So after knight d6, uh, black was threatening to take that f7 pawn, so now white takes the rook. They play bishop e3 to protect this g5 pawn. Um, if they were to play f4, black might be able to come in with the knight. So it's bishop e3, c5, bishop takes e2, d2, that's the other thing. So white just removes black's promotion threats. And actually in this position, black doesn't even take the bishop because this pawn on c3 is so valuable. So black just pushes c4. After f4, c takes b3. It looks like black is making some progress, and black is making progress, but white has made a little bit more progress than black. And the thing over here that we want to note is white has a rook on a1 and a rook on d1. So if black were to try to push any pawns through, white is able to give up a rook for one of the pawns that was about to promote, and then when they take back, they still have another rook guarding the first rank. However, if you look at black, black only has one rook. So if, for example, white got a pawn to f7 without the knight here on d6, black can't really give up a rook because they don't have another rook to capture back on, which is why white is better in a position like this as well. But it's not like completely winning. So that's after rook hg8, which is slightly inaccurate, and it's the most common move because it's so natural, thinking you can just defend that pawn. However, the best response to one knight h4 is, and also knight f4, is the defensive move bishop d6, which aims to win the pawn on e7. So right away, black is saying that they're not concerned about this g6 pawn, and because they can't defend it anyways with rook h8, white is just gonna take it by force. So black is gonna play bishop d6 and just try to take white's pawn on e7, and if white recaptures, just take both pawns, which will kind of reduce white's pawn promotion threats a little bit. Also, bishop d6 stops bishop takes g6 from being played, because after bishop takes g6, black can actually play bishop takes b3. And after, so the move is rook takes g2. But the reason why bishop takes e8 is not played is because black is going to respond back with bishop takes d1, and if white ever pushes his f pawn, black can just take on e7. However, if black pushes the c pawn, white doesn't have a bishop on e3 because they brought their knight to h4. So white is unable to take this e2 pawn in time. So this move is a mistake. Because of that, white has to play rook takes d2, because if they didn't, black is threatening to play c2 and try to promote, or just actually, no, they're threatening to take the rook first and then play c2. Right now the bishop is defending c2, but the whole point of the bishop taking on g6 is to take on e8, but now white can't do that if black's going to push the pawn to promotion. So after rook takes d2, c takes d2, bishop takes c8, rook takes c8, knight f5, black takes on e7, white brings the knight there, but black promotes to queen, white takes, black takes, g6 is played, white's pushing towards promotion. It looks like these pawns of white are very strong and they're just gonna promote. Meanwhile, black has to wait a few moves to be able to promote this b pawn. But the miracle move over here is knight d8, which mm, which eyes this f7 square. Um, and after, for example, g7, black can just take on. Oh, black can just take here on e2, and then if white were to promote, black takes, white takes, and white can never play this f7 move because the knight is eyeing this square, which now will take white several moves to push another pawn to promotion, and black can also push their pawns as well. Black would be faster in this position than white, which is why black is completely winning. So if we see a sort of like endgame position, this is just both sides now are racing to promotion as all these uh, pawns have been traded, and black is a little bit faster here because this knight here on g8 is blocking this g pawn's promotion. So white would have to spend another move to move the knight, as well as this pawn is 4 squares towards promotion, but black's b pawn is 3 squares towards promotion. So so that's so that's why this move is a mistake. But if we go all the way back, so after bishop d6, white is unable to play bishop takes g6, which after rook hg8, white was able to play that move. So the next thing is that white can still try to win this pawn. They're just going to play knight takes g6 instead. So the thing with knight takes g6 is that bishop g6, well, first of all, was a bit more forcing because the bishop was attacking the other bishop on f7, and if black were to take on b3 like we saw on the other line, then white is attacking this rook. But when the knight takes on g6, there is no attack to this bishop, and the only attack is on black's rook here on h8. But now black can play rook hg8, and the difference is that in the other line where black played rook hg8 right away, the bishop would have been on g6, but now there's a knight on g6, and that means that black is able to have this bishop on d6 and play rook to g7. And now if and since black is not taking the bishop on g6 because now it's a knight, black black doesn't is not forced to take it, because if we go back to this line, after bishop takes g6, black can't just play a move like bishop d6 because the bishop on f7 is hanging. But if bishop d6 is played, and now after knight takes g6, there's no attack on this bishop. So black just plays rook hg8, and there's a few moves that white can respond with. So white doesn't have to move this knight, but the first thing that white can do is they can save their knight, and um, they can play knight f4. Now knight f4 is important to play, not knight h4, because we want to push this h pawn forward. And if we play knight to h4, we can push the f pawn, but white already has an f pawn here on f6. Thus white is going to play knight f4. And again, it's pretty much never the move to play bishop takes f4, because again you're just pushing another white's pawn up the board. So after knight f4 is played, um, this pawn is hanging though on g5, so black is able to take the pawn, but this is still fine because white pushes h4. Now they have a tempo on this rook, as well as they have two more pawns, two more g pawns that they can push. So it's not like too big for white to give up that pawn. So black plays rook e5, and not rook g8. The rook on e5 is a little bit just better placed, and also it's helping to attack this e7 pawn. So white goes forward with g5, and black can take on e7, but they're not forced to right now. So I know the engine right now is saying bishop takes e7 is best, but the depth right now is very low. Once the engine thinks more, it realizes that okay, there's a few moves here, but the best move is knight c5. And knight c5 is just counter-attacking now white's b3 pawn, and black is hoping to get their own promotion ideas moving forward. So knight c5 is played, and as you can see here, there's many moves that can be played. So the most natural one is just g6, which is also a good move. Um, After g6, black takes on b3. So before we play g6, maybe the most natural move is actually rook ab1, not g6. This move is inaccurate because uh, the defensive move allows black to just push a5, and now if we play g6, similar to other lines that I was showing, the side can just take that pawn and then not have to worry about like losing material, because if like white were to take back, then black just gets another tempo on the bishop and just pushes forward to promotion. So actually white just goes g7, and now I guess black could take with the bishop as well, or not. If black were to take with the bishop, um, oh, then f7 is just winning. So tactical, oh yeah, because then g8 promotes to queen. So bishop takes e7 is a blunder here. So after g7, white is threatening to play f7, which is why black now has to take. On e7, they take, white takes, black takes, and after here, um, black has taken two pawns of white, and white is several moves away from promotion. So we could take on b3, but again, that just costing extra additional time. So it's important that white just pushes h5. After bishop f6, h6, white defends that pawn, and after black moves back to c5, black is better in this position because black just has so many pawns that are just ready to roll forward, and white only has this one rook left. And if we look at white's side, okay, white has a couple pawns closer to promotion, but if they ever push a pawn, that pawn, then g7 falls, and they can't really play. I mean, they could push the g pawn, but black's not going to take, because if they take, white can just go a10. Black will just go to e5, and then it will take a few more moves for white to get anything going. Meanwhile, black just has more pawns. The pawns are extremely important in this position. So we go all the way back over here. I think it's the same for rook db1. Yeah, it's the same for rook db1, the same issue we run into. And bishop g6. Well, bishop g6 is a move instead of g6, but after bishop g6, which is aiming for if black were to take, white takes back, and then they have extra defense on e7, requiring black to sacrifice more pieces, but black can just take on e7 here. Rook e2 is played because white's bishop is going to fall, and then that would cause c2 to be able to be played, because right now the bishop defends there. So after rook a2, um, bishop can take on b3 now, attacking both rooks. So white takes on d2, black takes, white takes back. King c7 is played, so uh, black is defending their bishop over here. Um, f takes e7 can be played, so white just wins that rook before black will move it. Um, and the game goes on from here. So actually both sides are even material. White still has a slight advantage uh, because I think white's pawns are just a little bit ahead of black's. Here white can actually take on d6. They can sacrifice the exchange. And what this move does is that after the rook takes, it allows white to push their pawns forward in a little bit of a different way, just because a bishop on d6 can go to e5 in some lines and kind of guard against promotion, and so white can sacrifice their rook to improve their chances at promotion, but now their rook also cannot defend against black. But white wants to argue in this position that their pawns are further advanced than black's, and that's why white still has a slight advantage according to the engine in this position. I'm just going to recap this line. So after bishop d6, knight takes, we have rook here, knight goes to f4, knight c5, and now the main line we have here is g6. So we can play two moves, bishop g6 or g6. So g6 is the second move over here, which I actually have as the main move in this position. White here is not concerned about the b3 pawn. They know that if they try to defend it with the rook, black will just take anyways, similar to white's line. So here black takes on b3, white takes, black takes, and white plays rook a2, which prevents c2 from being played. Now, it's a similar thing where if black takes on e7 with the bishop, white has f7. Um, actually, the pawn isn't. Let me see. If the bishop were to take, f takes e7. Yes, this is another line that can be played. But this is actually not the main move, because if we remember our rules from standard chess, and one of the principles of standard chess is that rooks are notoriously bad defenders. So what does this mean? This means that if we're trying to promote pawns, the rooks won't be too useful in defending, because the rooks can only defend laterally, and the pawns defend each other diagonally. So I think that rooks and bishops are probably around equal in defending against pawn promotion. So if black were to trade off their bishop, they don't have any bishops left. But if they trade off a rook, they're going to have one rook and one bishop. So the main move here is rook takes e7. Um, and now the funny thing here is that white doesn't even take. Because if white were to take on e7, then um, it's a similar position. I believe it might even be the exact same position as an earlier position that I showed, where white is kind of just a little bit far from promotion, and black's going to play like a5 and a4 next. Black's not even worried about bishop takes b6 after a5, because black will just play a4 and keep pushing the pawns forward. So black should be slightly better after this position. And that is why we have two other moves that are played. So if white is not taking this rook, they're saying that their pawn on f6 is just better than the rook on e7, at least in this context, where the pawn is so close to promotion. So e4 can be played. Now here, eventually, if black doesn't move the rook on e7, white will take, and then they'll just have another pawns closer to promotion that will kind of replace this f6 pawn. So eventually white is going to take on e7 once they've kind of replaced that pawn with more forward pawns. So black kind of saves the rook with rook e5, and then bishop e3 can be played as one of the moves, just looking at d2, and it's around an even game that can be played from this point. Again, the engine kind of takes some time to evaluate, so right now it's showing black's better, but that's not the case. G4 is the other move um, that can be played, and as white just kind of pushes the pawns more, and from here there's like lots of moves that can be played. So but it's still like a pawn promotion battle from here. The other move is after that rook takes on e7, we can play h5, and after h5, uh, black has this interesting move. So again, white will soon take on e7, maybe not right away, but so black can save the rook and go to e5 like before. White might just push like g4, but here black has this interesting move rook f7, which is the main move in this position. And what rook f7 does is white can take that rook for free, but then if white were to take, black's going to go to to f8, and white cannot defend the pawn, so black's going to take. So for example, if if white if white took, which is actually playable in this position because and the other thing is white cannot play g4 and then defend this f6 pawn because this knight would hang, but white defends the knight by going to d3, and then after rook takes f7, there is g4, rook takes f6, so black takes both of those pawns, which is why black is able to just give up the rook on f7. But white gets to kind of replace that pawn, one of the pawns at least, with another advanced pawn. Um, Black saves the pawn, goes to e6, and after h6, white is just pushing that pawn forward. Bishop f8 plans to go to g7 after h7 is played. So we can play h7, bishop g7, and white can play like f4 and keep pushing the pawns, and it still becomes mm, like a promotion battle. And after rook f7, yeah, so that's actually main move is just to take there because black is threatening to take on f6 if you don't take the rook on f7. So yeah, complicated theory, but if you understand the themes of the position, then you could play it more. And if you see the themes here is that pawns are very valuable, sacrificing pieces for pawns at the right time is valuable. Um, Getting your pawns towards promotion is super important, and replacing any pawns that your opponent might take with new forward pawns is very important. But we still have some more theory to go for in this line because um, after knight f4 was played, so bishop d6, um, then white with took on g6 with the knight, rook hg8, and then you after white moved the knight back to f4, that allowed black to take on g5 and then get the rook on e5, which eventually allowed black to take on e7. So is there a way to prevent that from happening? And the answer is yes. So after rook hg8, white doesn't have to move the knight. So moving the knight is the main move, but there are other moves too. So h4 and f4. Let's go for h4 first. So what h4 is hoping to do is that if black doesn't take the knight, then the next move, white can just go to f4, and black will not be able to take on g5 because now this pawn is protecting it. And also, if black were to take on g6, this would transpose into lines without bishop d6, the lines we went through near the beginning, where after knight h4 on move 1, rook h8 was an inaccuracy. So basically that means that after h4, bishop takes g6, this transposes to the rook hg8 lines, and actually, if you look at this position, you will remember this from what I showed earlier, where this is around +1 for white. So after h4, white can play h4 and know that black actually cannot really take that knight if they want to play the best moves at least. So now it looks like white should just be in a better position because they are now ready to move that knight. Um, however, um, however, black's not going to be taking this knight, and they're going to move forward with a good move. There's actually a few moves, but knight c5 is just the best move in this position. So black ignores this knight on g6, and they aim for white's pawn, and as well to push a5. After knight c5, white is going to play a couple moves. So knight f4 is one of them, and in this move, it kind of shows the point of why white played h4 and how black cannot take over here on g5. However, after knight f4, we have bishop takes b3. So black is just ignoring white, but they're pushing forward for their own plans. Bishop takes, knight takes, and rook a2. We've seen ideas like this before. But now black shows why they played bishop e6, because they take over here on e7. White plays f7, a5 is played. Again, it's kind of hanging this b6 pawn, but if white were to take, black's just playing a4, and they kind of don't really need this pawn because white has, and black has two other pawns right in front of it that are going to help instead. So after a5, g6 supports that pawn, and a4, and you'll see in this position, it's fine. It's not like this is bad for either side, but it's just another way to play the position. So white didn't get any extra advantage from white didn't get any extra advantage from playing h4 and this protecting the g5 pawn, because in the other line where black took and then went to e5, black was spending a couple moves with the rook. So even though the rook was able to then take on e7 and kind of damper white's promotion threats, black had to spend a few moves with the pieces. However, in this line where white plays h4, black doesn't do any of that, and they just take on b3, which is a helpful move for promoting the pawns, and then they push the pawns right away. So white kind of got an advantage where black is not able to get into the position this way, but then black got an advantage where they're able to push their pawns quicker. Thus this line is perfectly fine. And so moving back to here, white doesn't have to play knight f4 here. They can play h5. So after h5, we have knight takes b3 in that position, and the reason we don't have bishop takes b3 is because after bishop takes b3, knight takes b3, and rook a2. If we kind of go forward with our same lines, we notice that black cannot take on e7. Well, they can, but then white will take back with the knight instead of the pawn, and they'll still have this really strong f pawn. So if we go back to here, bishop takes b3 is just not good in this position. Instead, black would play knight takes b3. And the reason why this move is fine um, is because this bishop on f7 is still here, and this bishop on f7 is a defender against white pushing f7 in many lines. So there's so much offense in this position, but there's also defensive motives you have to be aware of as well. So because white's knight is defending e7, which makes it harder for black to disrupt white's pawns close to promotion, black takes on b3 with the knight instead of the bishop. Um, After rook a b1, mm, white plays knight a5, and sorry, black plays knight a5, and white goes f4. And now here, um, b3 is not played because I guess it could be played, but it's not the greatest move because after b3 and bishop f5, if black were to play c2, white can just take on d2 with the rook because after black takes, white takes back with the bishop, and now black is several moves before they can promote, and white has all these strong pawns right over here. But b3 is fine. It just you can't follow it up with c2 in this position because the bishop is still on the board defending against promotion, and um, black will spend more time promoting those pawns. So like c2 right now is inaccurate because yeah, right, because of rook takes and then takes, and black now is a few moves towards promotion. Um, bishop takes b1. Yeah, if they were to play, for example, here. Oh, and also after rook takes, this bishop on d6 is hanging as well. So so that's the other reason why c2 can't work in this position. But so going back, the main move here is knight c4, and the idea behind knight c4 is okay. We're not really threatening b3 right now, but black wants to kind of remove the pieces around the promotion squares and then push the pawns after. So knight c4, bishop f5 kind of stops the fork on um, on a3. So black plays a5, and now white plays knight h4, preparing to play g6. And this is a good time for black to play bishop takes and rook takes, which kind of dampers white's promotion threats a little bit. g6, bishop d5, h6, and uh, white is pushing forward, but black has two rooks defending right now, and black still has plenty of strong pawns to push for themselves. So going all the way back, that is this h5 line. And so basically, in the knight in the one knight h4 line, those are the main like sort of best lines that I've shown you. So to recap, bishop e6 is the only move here, though I guess rook hg8, it's only +1 for white, so it's still all right. But bishop d6 is the only like move that's still like equal. And then knight takes g6 can be played, and then here white can either move the knight, and that allows black to take a pawn, go to e5, and then eventually take another pawn, but black has to spend several moves with their pieces. Or white can play the move the move h4, which does not allow black to get the rook in that way, but then black goes forward for their promotion ideas right away. So those are two sort of ideas that we can play. And so after bishop d6, I kind of want to just go over one more thing. So it's not bishop g6, bishop d6. So then, because it's not like taking on g6 is winning. So white has another move that they can play, which is bishop e3. So kind of the same idea as black. They put their bishop to try and take on d2, just like black is trying to threaten to take on e7. Um, Now here, black can play rook hg8 because they've got an extra move in with the bishop, which can take the pawns on e7. So like for example, now if white were to take on g6, um, I don't have another move of added over here in the current analysis, but if black takes and then white and black takes back, then um, after h4, black can immediately take on e7 because they have one extra move in. There's no f7 for white that can fork the two rooks, and black is just doing um, slightly better than they were in the other line at least. So after knight takes g6, bishop takes h4, bishop takes e7, and white is should be better in this line. So perhaps we don't play rook hg8. So this is when we're doing the live. Maybe we could play bishop takes e7 instead. Yeah, it looks like that move is better. So so when we're doing these live theory videos, sometimes we find new lines that we didn't see before. So I'll promote this bishop takes e7 line. So knight takes g6 here, bishop takes, and to bishop takes, there's bishop c5, takes, black takes, so now black's pawn is got pushed one more square towards promotion. So if we go back over here, white's bishop was attacked, so that's why, and they couldn't move the bishop away, so they chose to take, and now they can, but now white can take on e8, so now black only has one rook left. For g6, white plays knight d8, which we've seen like in a previous line, so some of these lines do overlap, though it's showing white is better now. So it looks like they want knight d6 instead. Mm-hmm. So knight d6 would be played in this position. Then after move like e4, king f2, black is going to play c4 and use that pawn that took to counteract white's promotion ideas. So it looks like over here it's showing white is better again. So one of the other things is sometimes it'll show like one side is better, like you've seen in this theory video, but then once you run it for a while, it will either confirm that or it will deny that. So going back to after bishop e3, this can take here on b3 like we saw in a previous, no, that doesn't work. So after bishop e3. Because the bishop takes e7 was a move that I came up with, but if that move is winning, the engine, well, we know rook hg8 doesn't evaluate too great. So yeah, we probably have to run this line a little bit. So yeah, moving after knight d6. Yeah, this could be something to look at in the future. I'm gonna have to make an update video on this. Going back over here, I'll go through the rest of the notes right now. So that was one knight h4. Now we can start with one knight f4. So after one knight f4, after bishop d6, um, knight takes g6 transposes to the one knight h4 lines. And so the other move that can be played is that after knight f4, white is trying to push this h-pawn forward to promotion, whereas with the knight h4 move, white was pushing the f-pawn. So after the move h4, there are a couple of moves that can be played. One of them is knight c5. After knight c5, there are a few moves. One is knight takes g6. Yeah, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the other lines in different video because this video has already been long enough. So I think I'm going to break this up into separate videos. But this is the knight h4 line for now. This video was on that line. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you in the next